Apparently, philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wasn't too keen on starting the day, but boredom would eventually crowbar her out of bed so she could be working by 10. After a cup of tea, she would work for 6 hours before leaving the house to meet up with friends. Friedrich Nietzsche, on the other hand, would be awake before dawn. He'd have a cold bath and warm milk and then write until 11, after which he would go on a brisk walk. He took private lunches, then would head back home and write until late into the evening. Toni Morrison has said that the writer's ritual is a way to approach that place where they expect to make the contact, where they become the conduit. She also gets up before dawn and watches the sunrise with a cup of coffee. My morning ritual is similar. It's kind of a combination of these three. By leagues and bounds, I am not a morning person, but sitting in bed does lose its luster. I get up, I feed my dog Jack, I put on The Daily Show, and I make coffee. This is really the major part of my morning routine, making coffee. At this point, it's nearly automatic. The stuff and ingredients are always in the same place, the steps always identical. Really, it's kind of less like I'm making coffee and more like my body is making coffee for me while my brain occupies itself with other things, like waking up. The author Haruki Murakami described the experience of this kind of repetition as being mesmerized. The repetition is the important thing, he said. It's a form of mesmerism. I mesmerize myself to reach a deeper state of mind. For me, that mesmerism can become a little bit overwhelming. So like Nietzsche, and perhaps the only way I'm like Nietzsche, I get away for a little bit in the afternoons. Usually I take Jack for a walk. And like Beauvoir, I need to go out and see people. So I try to meet up with friends, go and see music or see theater, but none of this happens until this happens. And yes, this is my favorite mug that I use every morning. Being not a morning person, the caffeine is surely part of it, but I also find that the attraction to this ritual of boiling water, measuring and grinding beans, prepping the filter, is about this familiarity, about interacting with a set of objects that perfectly and reliably do their thing every morning. It's almost like they reduce the friction of my morning. Friction which, if too great, my inertia would have a very hard time overcoming, and so I would stay in bed longer than is wise or responsible, because I am an adult with responsibilities.
This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee.
I work mostly from home now, but even before I did, it was like this. I took some kind of strange pleasure in being able to go to Soho or Chelsea or Bushwick, where I would go to my coffee shop and see my barista who knew my coffee order, none of which are in any way mine. Well, except for the coffee, which I guess is mine because I paid to own it, but the order itself is no more mine than anyone else's.
While I've got your attention, there are...
Coffee first.
Either way, this is how lots of us consider these things, as though they are ours. As our familiarity with our daily or regular processes increases, so too can this sense that they somehow belong to us, or that we are entitled to them. And things that are ours are easy, non-threatening. They have low friction, or contribute to a general lack of friction in our daily lives. It's during the morning when, as Vanessa talked about on Braincraft, our mental abilities might not be at their most acute, or during some intense cognitive activity like writing, painting, coding, playing Spelunky, that the presence of any of this friction is particularly onerous. And so we collect and manage, maybe ritualistically, situations and things. They become ours, and so the world becomes more approachable. Or, in having them, we become, as Toni Morrison said, a conduit, a passive, undistractable pathway for whatever work we're about to do. Idea Channel's crankiness mascot, Jean Baudrillard, actually has some things to say about this in his book, The System of Objects. Objects, he said, become mental precincts over which I hold sway. They become things of which I am the meaning. They become my property and my passion. Baudrillard was writing about literal objects and actual collections of them, but I think the emotional comfort we experience in gathering things and turning them into routines is similar. After all, Baudrillard said we don't really possess things so much as we possess an abstraction of them based on how we use them, based on how we have a relationship to them. In other words, my Chemex isn't just a Chemex, my kettle not just a kettle. They're part of a system of objects that help me construct the world in a way that's personally significant, and that is what I possess. This is how objects are able, in his words, to dissipate neuroses, to provide an outlet for tensions, to deliver us from anxiety. We have something not unlike literal love for these literal things. Baudrillard thought that objects build our environment, but also through that weird sorta love, us. What you really collect, he said, is always yourself. Anyone who has ever looked at someone else's bookshelf, record collection, iTunes library, or even inside their fridge or purse knows exactly what this means. But if you'll allow me a bit of a long walk, I think it also applies to our morning routines. The set of objects and actions and situations that we interact with on a daily basis and in such a way that we feel a strong sense of ownership over them. This, I think, is why it's interesting knowing what Beauvoir, Morrison, Nietzsche, or Murakami do in the morning. It's like looking at their bookshelf or inside their purse. Because, I mean, how lucky for them that they can architect this life where they can take an afternoon walk every day, or see their friends by 6 p.m. or go swimming each afternoon, as Murakami says he does when he's writing a novel. Knowing the routines of others, especially intellectual giants, is a kind of window shopping, crossed maybe with looking through a keyhole, a momentary blurry glimpse at someone's personal life and some of the stuff that comprises it. What do you guys think? What's your morning ritual, and do parts of it feel like they're yours? Let us know in the comments. And the best part of waking up is Idea Channel subscribers. Delicious. Candy camouflage! Let's see what you guys had to say about Over the Garden Wall. First things first, did you know that you can make animated GIFs of Idea Channel on YouTube? It only works in the desktop version, but just below the video itself, there's a little share button. If you click on that, there's a tab that says GIF. GIF, and then it will generate a GIF of whatever portion of the video you would like. So exciting. Okay, now, Over the Garden Wall comments. Amvousdent on the subreddit, whose username I am Frenching up even though I don't know if I'm supposed to, writes a really great comment about how you could see Over the Garden Wall as a series not necessarily about faith, but about responsibility. And I think this is a really awesome read. And I think also stays with that topic of differences between being a child and maybe being an adolescent, that there's this point in your life you're getting older and you start to realize that you have responsibilities and you can be a little reticent, I guess, in the face of them. But yeah, this was a really awesome comment. Thank you for writing this, Amvousdent, or amvousdent. Sean Davison, CHUCKLZLORD, and a bunch of other people have a really great conversation about honesty as it relates to faith, and that if you are having faith in something working out, are you in some sense being dishonest? I'm a little bit more on CHUCKLZLORD's side, that I don't think dishonesty is really the right word, and that, you know, what you have to be careful of is this point where faith becomes self-reinforcing in light of external evidence. But yeah, this was a really great conversation that a lot of people had, so links to this one and all of the other comments in the doobly-doo. Harriette Reece asks a really interesting question about whether or not you can view a knight of faith as a hero. And I am not a religious person, so I would be really curious to know what people who know the Bible and its stories much better than I feel about the idea of Abraham's heroism or courage, because I get the sense that a lot of people find his level of faith to be exactly heroic or courageous. But that's a big, I don't know, that's a big, I think they do. But as far as the big question of whether or not someone who has faith can be a hero, I think that's a really interesting one, and I think that it very much depends on your ideas of faith, courage, and heroism. So I'm not gonna come down on either side, but I think this is a really great question that you guys should have out in the comments. Thank you for asking this, Harriet. David Frank makes a very salient point that it was not Greg's faith, but Wirt's cynicism that ended up saving the day, and yeah, I would buy that for $1, but I think that there was a pathway that led them to that point that required one of the two of them having a good amount of faith, right? I think so. Bearse writes about how hope is not something that is taken from you, but rather something that you give up, and talks about how the relationship between Greg and Wirt is such an important part in having the story end up the way that it does. And I absolutely agree, and I think that that's one of my favorite things about Over the Garden Wall is the relationship between the brothers, which is just so, God, so good. I just like it so much. Moriah Kreeger talks about her own fear as an audience member watching Over the Garden Wall dissolving along with that of the characters. And this is actually one of my favorite storytelling techniques that I think it does really well, which is that you sort of set up this expectation in the audience that everything is bad or dark or hopeless. You give them that, and then at every turn you have it resolve in the opposite way. And I think that there are a lot of things that do this really well. The one that always comes right to mind is Louis, that in the first episode of Louis, you're sort of led to believe that Louis is awful, and he is, which, you know, he is, and that he's going to fail at everything, and he fails at a lot of things, but when he gets it, you're so celebratory because you think of him, because of the way the series sets him up, as a loser. So when he wins, it's like an extra win. And I love this tactic, and I see it employed in a lot of places really well. Rab Townsend brings up the idea of the knight and how it's important to note that when Kierkegaard was writing about knights, he was writing about people who were sacrificing, who had some sort of noble process that they were working towards. Kierkegaard called them movements. And I think this is a really astute criticism, and the thing that I think I was kind of wrestling with at the end, right? Like, Greg can't really have much of a noble goal. He can't make these movements because he's a kid and doesn't really know that he has that is a possibility for him. So I agree, and a couple other people mentioned that, like, maybe the application of Kierkegaard was a little weird. I think it was. I absolutely am on board with the weirdness of the Kierkegaard application. Emily Booker writes about how you can also view similarities between Over the Garden Wall and Gravity Falls, which, let me tell you, if we could make half-an-hour-long episodes, this episode would have been about Over the Garden Wall, Earthbound, and Gravity Falls. We'll do episodes about those things very soon. This week's episode was brought to you by the hard work of these Knights of Faith and Resignation. We have a Facebook and IRC and a subreddit, links in the doobly-doo. We have a bit of a holiday schedule, so we're gonna have a video that comes out on Christmas Eve day, and then we are taking the next week off, and then we will be back on January 7th with a full episode and comment responses to this video, the morning ritual video. The tweet of the week comes from This Is Johnny, who made a gif of my big dumb face. It's a good one.